Welcome to Cartoon Creators, where we talk to the minds behind the shows that raised us. I'm your host, Tamar Lilienthal, and today we're talking to Jim Coane. Jim is the creator of Dragon Tales, and in this episode, we talk about the artwork that inspired him to create the show, what the production process was like, and the legacy that Dragon Tales continues to have to this day. Let's get to the episode. Welcome, Jim, to the podcast. We're so excited to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
So, yeah, Jim, tell us about yourself. I think we usually start the podcast off by just asking folks how they got into this industry, how they got into this work, because everyone's got a story. So, what's yours?
How far do you want me to go back?
As far as you
I
want,
can
as
go
far as
back
you
to when
want.
I graduated from college and do a kind of a shorter version of it, but it'll tell you everything you need to know probably about my career and how I got to Dragon Tales. And I'll combine a little bit of the sort of Dragon Tales development into that. So, look, as you know, you obviously looked at my resume. I did not follow the typical path for animation excuse me, or children's programming. It was always the kind of road not taken for me. And when I
Mm-hmm.
was 22, I had just graduated college and I had no career ideas. I thought maybe I wanted to be a writer, like Ferlinghetti or Browdigan. So I moved to Berkeley. And like any good San Francisco writer, I worked as a waiter. And it was kind of a dead end. So I decided to move to New York City, where I was from, and I was unemployed, basically, until a friend hired me as a PA on a documentary shooting in Washington, D.C., about the Vietnam vets giving their medals back to Congress. It
Oh,
was
wow.
really an emotional um, story. But that was the first time I saw, touched, held a motion picture camera. And my question was, who controls this thing? And they said it was the director. And I had kind of my first eureka moment because I thought, I want to be a director. So I returned to New York City after that shoot, and I thought since I could write, maybe I'd start a script, and I did, called Exit 70. And it was a very short anti-war guerrilla theater type of production.
Mm-hmm.
Separately, my friend, who was a film major at NYU, decided he was going to work for his father, but he still needed to complete a short film to graduate. I volunteered. He got me camera, he got me editing, and I asked all my friends to help or be in the cast. And I was directing. And I thought, this could be a career. And a few months
Wow.
later, a crazy, and I mean crazy financier hired me to film the Everything is Everything Ball, which was a gigantic trans and gay ball held at the Hotel Roosevelt in New York with judges, celebrities, and a big turnout. This is when Holly Woodlawn and who was Andy Warhol's star, came. And this is before the world or myself really understood about the trans or gay world. But
Right.
pathways don't always connect, but it all leads to my first real job, just a step below PA at MPO Productions in New York, at that time, the largest TV commercial producer in the world. Since no one would hire me, because I was an inexperienced director, I decided to direct a few commercials on my own dime, again with the help of friends. And I
Wow.
left MPO after 2 years as a kind of a freelance. I guess I was a director, but I really wasn't. And I worked for a few different companies who I convinced to take a chance on me. Now I'm 25, and I decided to start my own production company, which I did, and it was successful for a lot of years. But a few years later, I was offered an opportunity to direct a segment for a new Fox show not yet on air. They were calling it AMW, which was America's Most Wanted. And the show was a hit. And Fox was
Wow.
starting up as a network. And they offered me an opportunity to work on staff on some of their shows, like Totally Hidden Video and some pilots and other things. And I stayed at Fox for 3 years. And then I went to a smaller independent production company where we created and produced hundreds, literally hundreds of hours of nonfiction, doc, how to, and reality TV, including Emmy Award winning Future Quest for PBS. And my next production was
Mm.
Walking the Bible, also for PBS, based on Bruce Feiler's best-selling book. It was for me, it was the greatest travel and production experience of my life, and it's why I got into the business. So PBS kind of knew me. And at that time, we were also developing a children's show for PBS with Mary Lou Retton. And we pitched it, they passed. But that was the first time I worked on a children's series, and I thought, I wonder what would happen if I tried to create one. But what? So I asked the questions I always ask myself at the beginning of development. What will the show be about? And who are the characters? Where does it happen? What are the stakes? And why will viewers care? Apart from that, I got a phone call from my agent, and he asked me if I'd be interested in an overall production deal with Columbia TriStar Television. Big deal, a studio. The idea
Wow.
was I could create, develop, and sell original TV series with a studio behind me. At the same time that happened, I saw Ron Roediger's Dragon Drawings, which I'm going to show you in a second, at a local art fair. I don't know how to describe it. In Laguna, it was called the Sawdust Festival, and that's what it was. And the artwork was kind of whimsical and humorous and emotional, and it stopped me. And it started to make me think, what is this stuff? And I took it back and I developed a show based on that artwork called
Wow.
Dragon Tales. And it was really kismet. Let me now bring up that stuff. It's the artwork to the cover of this little booklet that I created to pitch. Because in those
Oh,
days, you
wow.
could sell a show off of art. You didn't need animation, you didn't need the whole thing. But what I noticed about Ron's artwork was that all the children's series, Camelot and uh, you can see them all listed up there. Emerald City,
Yeah.
Narnia. This one is closed. The Primrose Path was closed, and I thought that was pretty cool. And there was also The Path Less Taken, and I thought immediately of the Robert Frost poem. And
Yeah.
when I started thinking of the Robert Frost poem, that kind of got me going. Um, you know, that was the first picture. And this was the second picture I saw. Can you
Oh,
see it?
wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Little boy in bed,
Yeah.
sleeping, reading a book to a dragon and what it reminded me of, I was afraid to death growing up that there were dragons under my bed, that there were
Yeah.
monsters under my bed. So I thought, what about developing a show about children's fears and give them solutions to kind of work with their fears? And I saw all these characters in the closet and under the bed, and I thought, it's all there. And now all I got to do is figure out, what the show is. And so that was my next step. So the Frost poem, The Road Not Taken, I don't know if you know it or not,
Yeah.
but
It's my favorite. Yeah.
yeah. So the last few lines of it were, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be writing this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all
All
the
the
difference.
difference. Yeah.
And that is my second eureka moment. That's when I realized, oh my goodness, I may have a show here. And so, again, you could sell it on a pitch booklet. So my thought was create an animated series about children's fears along the path of life, but give kids choices. But the
Mm.
primrose path is closed. There's not going to be anything easy about life. And I wanted them to understand that. And then I started to think about other children's shows that affected me growing up. And I remembered, I don't know if you know the show Winky Dink.
I've heard of it.
Winky Dink and Me. It was a show that was the first interactive show. You had to send in, and they'd send you a screen which you could put over your TV, and you could draw on it and become part of the story. Winky Dink would
Wow.
fall into a hole, and you had to draw a ladder so that Winky Dink could get out. It was
Wow.
it was great. It was the first interactive TV show. And, I wanted to do something like that, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. So we didn't know how to do a live you're there decision tree. It was a development failure. We never got it right. And also, I'm now developing the show, and I'm thinking, well, what are we going to call the characters? Who are they? What are they doing? So to
Mm,
keep it simple, I just use placeholders: Max, Cassie, and Amy, my family. We could always change it later, but I
huh.
thought, listen, I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the names are. I need to get on here with the storyline. So I
Right.
hired a writer to work with me and a graphics artist to put together the booklet. And within weeks, we had our little booklet together. And I take my skinny little booklet to Mick Jr. in Coane, and I met with, among others, Marjorie Kalitz, who was an old ally. We had worked together at MPO, my first job, and she was now a big, big muckety muck at the Children's Television Workshop. And we
Huh.
had lunch, and I showed her the booklet, and she gets it. She tells me, now here we begin with so many initials. She tells me there's an RFP, a request,
Yes. Yes. Request for
there's an
proposal for sure.
RFP for a
Yeah.
CPB grant funded by the DOE for $12 million to produce a new children's series.
Huh.
18 other companies, including WGBH and the best children's producers in the world, would be competing for the money. The only problem was the proposal was due in 3 weeks.
Wow.
CTW wanted to apply for the grant, which meant that CTW and Columbia had to work out a deal, and the clock was running. The only proviso for the grant was it had to include a Latino character. No
Mm.
problem. We changed Emmy's name to Emmy, Amy's name to Emmy, and we started injecting Latino elements into it. So this world of preschool and animation and CPB, this is a new world for me. I don't know anything about grant writing. I have no experience in children's programming. So I figure I'm going to let CTW and the Sesame Street people lead the way and give them credit. Within 3 weeks. Their research team, headed by Rita Weisskopf, who I love forever, and their other educational mavens, expanded my fear curriculum to include stories built around the four major children's challenges: physical, social, cognitive, and emotional, which was fear. To me, these four challenges were just an opportunity to expand the story canvas. And what they suggested for each story was to show partial success. We all
Mm.
understand that no child rides a bike the first time they try. So just holding on, even for a few feet, was the goal of the story. Partial success leads to true success. And that became our mantra. For a format, we agreed on mine, which was each episode would have two stories and a fun musical interlude. The song for the series, for the open, needed to be original and needed to be memorable. And so I heard in my mind's ear a commercial that I had worked on. I'm stuck on band-aids and band-aids stuck on me. And that was written by a guy named Joey Levine. So I called Joey and asked him if he'd be interested. And he agreed, and he did the music for the entire series. The
Wow.
anima- yeah, the animation was a separate problem. How do you translate Ron's very painterly look into 2D cell animation? It's really difficult. And here I give credit to Richard Reynes, who was Sony's top animation artist for the redesign. Now, Columbia is still negotiating with Children's Television Workshop, and the stakes were high because, as you know, a successful preschool series can have a huge merchandising payoff. And the politics of finishing the deal were touch and go, with only like a week to go before the proposal was due in Washington, D.C. at the CPB. They,
Whew.
fin- they finally agreed on how to cut the pie. My studio's executive vice president's reaction was not good. It was kind of like, nobody's going to help you. Good luck with this. See you later. And that hurt. And I took that as another challenge. Yes, there might be bumps on the road, but I never thought we wouldn't ride that bike. Never, ever. I always knew it was going to happen. Weird feeling. So CTW puts together the grant package with a 70-page detailed educational plan and an outreach component. They place it in a white case with my little pitch book, tie a ribbon around it, which I still have. And it was due to be delivered before 5 p.m. on a Friday. And rather than drive it in a snowstorm, an exec from Children's Television Workshop took it on a train to DC, and we met the deadline. And
Wow.
now we sit and wait and sit some more. Several weeks later, I get a phone call from my friend Marjorie at CTW. We won the grant. The order is for 65 episodes, 130 stories. I still remember that rush. We won. I took a deep breath, collected myself, and went to see that evil executive vice president and
Wow.
asked him, "Now will you help?" And they did. So what happened was
Wow.
Children's Television Workshop flies to LA, and we have this big deal, love you, mean it kind of meeting with 15 execs from both companies, blah, 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 blah. And someone asked me, how did I plan to get the content on the storyline? Moment of panic. I didn't know what they meant. I had that same moment of panic when I EP'd my first show at Fox, and they asked me about the bumpers, and I had no idea what they were talking about. And I think to myself, the what, the content on the storyline, there was nothing between my ears. So I start to dance. Yes, we're doing that. We'll see what it's like. Blah, 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 blah. End of story. The meeting has no more panic attacks for me, and it thankfully ends. We all shake hands and hug it out. It's now officially greenlit. Now we need outlines, script, animation, writing teams, characters, and background designers. Because, Columbia owned Sony or Sony owned Columbia, it was kind of everyone was there. And we will also need to write 130 stories, rewrite them, storyboard them, animate them, view the rough cuts, record voices, compose music, and finish by the air date. No problem,
Wow.
right? So to make a long story short, 4 years after I saw the original Dragon Tale pictures, the series was broadcast by PBS. And Dragon Tales, often led other kids shows in the morning ratings. It was kind of a hit. We beat Barney. We beat Sesame Street. We got 3 Emmy nominations. We never won. Welcome to Showcase. Then CTW had the best promotion idea. The character Cassie would be featured in a 35-foot high helium balloon in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And she was floated from Central Park West at 81st Street to 34th and Herald Square. And I sat in that viewing stand with my family as Cassie floated high above us and people cheered. My daughter Cassie, who was then 5, was so not impressed. It was you know how kids are. It was a gray November day. She was cold and she just wanted to go home. And I agreed. And as Daffy Duck would say, that's all, folks. So that's the story of how we got there.
Wow, that's an incredible story, and thank you so much for sharing it. Uh, I think, I'm curious. Something that I'm curious about is I once heard, and I don't know how true this is, but I once heard that Dragon Tales was such a first for PBS because they were slash are always so shy of introducing kind of fantasy elements and portals and things like
Oh,
that
no, they
because
didn't want to
parts of
do
the
it.
country don't love it. Did they give
Yeah,
you any issue?
yeah, I remember that. Yeah, they did not want to do this whole idea of fantasy lands and powers and things. They were against it,
Huh.
but the art was so strong, and
Right.
our Bible was so strong, and the stories that we suggested were really great that they gave it to. By the way, they also, because we were a Japanese-owned company, Sony owned Columbia TriStar. That became the big controversy. Would they give
Mm.
American money to a Japanese-owned company? So what ultimately happened was they gave another grant to WGBH to do Between the Lions, which I thought was a good show, but it didn't have the punch that Dragon Tales had. So yeah, PBS didn't want to do it particularly, but I give credit to Children's Television Workshop for hanging in there and convincing them we could do it. They figured it out, and that's how the show happened.
Wow.
But
Wow.
yeah, what you heard is not untrue. And the other thing that I've heard is how many people take credit for creating the show. There was a, and you'll find that a lot in children's TV, I understand. Everyone takes credit. There was only
Oh,
one person in the beginning, and there's only one person at the end, and it was me. But if people want to take credit for it, go ahead, because the truth is the truth.
that's such a funny observation that you're making because as I sort of, research into different shows, even in terms of like, oh, we haven't tapped into this property yet for the podcast, and who do I want to bring on next? I often do find that you research any given show, and it's like it was created by, and then like has like these many
Yeah,
different people who maybe like gave a cent here, a little piece there, and you end up very confused about what the story was. So that's funny.
yeah, a lot of people like to take credit for things they didn't do. What am I going to do? What is anyone going to do? So, you'll meet people along the road who will tell you they created Dragon Tales. But Ron Roediger, because of his artwork, it was so beautiful to me. It was just inspirational. And when you can find stuff like that, if you can find that moment where you have kind of a eureka moment, I know what this show is about. I know where we're going. I know what it's going to be. That is rare. I've only had
Yeah.
that really one or two times my whole career. And that's plenty. If you get one, that's a good
Yeah.
career. Um, so that's the story.
No, for sure, for sure. And did you end up like, what did your relationship with Ron Redeker become like through
Good.
this?
I mean, he was a retired school teacher, and
Mm,
I love Ron. So Ron came to the meeting, and the problem that we had with Ron, he really wanted to be the executive producer. He had no sense of story. He didn't
um,
understand animation, but he was involved from beginning to end, and I used to send him the rough cuts and get his notes. And Ron was a good guy. What can I say? Very good guy.
yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
this is such a fascinating story and so detailed. So thank you, though I imagine that there's way more detail, but nonetheless, thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'm
I mean, I didn't
yeah.
want to bore you completely.
Ah.
So, yeah, there's a lot more detail, but I figured that's plenty.
No, I appreciate it. And so tell me, what did things look like for you after Dragon Tales? And
Well,
what are you sort of
yeah,
doing now? Anything you want to share?
yeah, sure, I can tell you. So after Dragon Tales, what did I do? I was still had my own production company, and I developed and did mostly reality and nonfiction TV
Huh.
until a couple of years later, I found a children's series that I liked. And I started to develop it. And it's like Dragon Tales in that it happens in a fantasy world with more than just people. The core of the show is music. But that's not the curriculum. The curriculum was different, but it was really all about music. And
Hmm.
I took it to PBS, and the timing was terrible. I mean, of course they wanted to find something to work with me again, but they had another music show at that time already in development, and I think it was with GBH. I don't know if it ever happened.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, so again, that was sort of the only other children's show, and I had to get the rights to it because I didn't create the show. It was created by a major studio who had produced whatever, and it was so complicated to get the rights. And we got them. We had lawyers and we negotiated that, but we couldn't sell it. And then I pitched it to Nick, and Nick is really tough. They didn't get it, and that's fine. And so I just kind of pushed it aside and thought the timing was wrong. A lot of
Mm.
these things are timing. You got to be at the right time with the right idea. And that was the wrong time. But now I work on other shows. After that, I also began to teach. I teach or taught at UCLA and the New York Film Academy. And while I was teaching, one of the students who was really, I don't know, he thought I was good, I guess. After he graduated, he asked me if I would help develop him a show. And I don't develop for free. I said, you got to find money. And he did. And we started to develop the show, which is now shooting in Japan. It's a very
Wow.
idiosyncratic Japanese, locally driven show. I could give you an example. It's about, for instance, two towns that are 3 miles apart. And this is not in Tokyo. This takes place in really rural Japan. And these two towns compete with each other over everything. It's just the history. And so you go to those two towns and you can tell great stories and how that happened. So I'm working on that show. And I'm developing other projects, as needed. I get calls. I got a call from, uh, what's his name, Jeff, who was the president of Columbia when I was there, and he asked me to develop a show for something that he was working on. So I get calls to develop stuff, and I do, and
Right.
and that's sort of what I do today. I'm kind of semi-retired. It's got to be something that perks me, you know,
For
makes me,
sure.
but that's sort of what I'm doing today. I've
And is it
stopped.
ever any children's series?
Sorry?
And is it ever any children's series these days?
No, I mean, some of this stuff is children's series, some of it isn't.
Huh,
Now that I worked in children's, I have some credit. And
for sure.
so, I can work with people. I worked, what was the other children's show? With, I forget now. I mean, yes, I've developed other children's shows, but I love documentary. I do. When I did Walking the Bible, I
Mm,
went to Haran, Turkey. It's unbelievable. And we went
wow.
all throughout Turkey and Jordan and Israel, and we stopped in Lebanon. We went all over the Middle East. And for me, that's what the business is about: travel,
Yeah.
storytelling. Um, I did it with a BBC crew. The BBC crews for documentaries are so different and so unbelievable. It was really the most fun I ever had creating a show. And,
Wow.
and I didn't create that because it was based on Bruce's book, but we had to lay it out, we had to figure it out, and all the travel and just very complicated production. But
Right.
I would work on one of those tomorrow if it struck me.
Wow. Wow. No, that's fantastic. And I think especially kind of in an industry like this one where things are always so in flux,
Yeah.
it's great to sort of have, projects of all kinds and kind of like, hands in many places. So that sounds fantastic.
Yeah,
But
people, you're going to find in your career that everyone's going to tell you who you are and what you do. And you
mm,
just have to break those shackles.
well, thank you. Thank you so, so much. Thanks for tuning in to Cartoon Creators. We would love if you connected with us on one of our social media channels. Have a comment, question, or an idea for a guest we should bring on to the pod? Email us at info@cartooncreators.com. Both words starting with a K, of course.